up front, they're out there.
Make sure you're there for Clive James' special Postcard from Chicago. 7:30 Saturday, ABC.
Good evening. Tonight, our major review is a rundown of the television news bulletins right across Australia. Not so much diversity, but duplication. This review covers the main TV news bulletins in all mainland states. We've spread ourselves across all news networks, but it has to be said that 9 wins the ratings everywhere. We selected last Wednesday night and started in Melbourne.
This is 10 News with David Johnston, Tracy Curo and Mal Walden.
Bank hold-up drama as 3 men are caught after crashing their getaway car. Tonight...
10 News in Melbourne led with a typical crime story. First item only because they had pictures of a spectacular arrest.
Alistair Patterson was in the 10 News helicopter for this exclusive coverage of their arrest.
It was at about 9:45 this morning after an armed robbery on the Kingsville ANZ Bank that police mounted one of their biggest manhunts.
At the bottom of the bulletin, an animal story, treated with excessive gravity to say the least.
The Lost Dogs Home says it's one of the worst cases of animal cruelty they've come across. And as Jim Brown reports, it'll be some time before the rescued cats recover from their 6-month ordeal.
The animals lived in their own feces. They weren't in bad condition physically, but their eyes show the months of neglect as they cower in their cages.
Now, that cat story ranked higher with 10 in Melbourne than this item on Vietnamese refugees that looked, because of its position in the bulletin, suspiciously like a filler.
Many are prepared to die for the dream of a better life.
The sheer size of the crisis is pushing the authorities towards breaking point. They just can't cope. The Marine Police, 45% understaffed, intercept at least 400 boat people every day.
10, apparently confusing quantity with quality, gave us at one stage no fewer than 5 studio presenters, with the sportsman unable to find room at the desk.
The hearing isn't until 8:30, but you do have some news on the case.
That's right, Bruce.
10's news reporter Steve Quartermain, filing from Headingley, told us that the atmosphere in the dressing room after the Aussies beat England made you proud to be Australian.
After every victory, it's traditional for the Australian team to recite a little poem. Usually the media are banned from viewing such an occasion. Today, though, protocol was thrown off the Headingley balcony.
Underneath the Southern Cross I stand, a sprig of laurel in my hand, a native of my native land, Australia, yeah,
Then the real partying began, with music supplied by Cold Chisel, 4X and French champagne flowing freely. It was time to cut loose.
Next time, let's hope they stick to protocol. Still in Melbourne, 9 sticks to a single newsreader. The image they're promoting is maturity and credibility.
Good evening. 3 suspected armed robbers have been captured by police after a dramatic shootout in Melbourne's western suburb.
Lacking credibility, though, was David Broadbent's China report, in which he treated Chinese government propaganda as fact.
Topping the most wanted list is this man, Wu Kai-shi, pictured at a demonstration 3 weeks ago. A hidden camera also captured him eating at a restaurant when he was supposed to be on a hunger strike, the TV commentary accusing him of living it up at the expense of other students.
More about that shortly. Wholesale duplication in Melbourne. Of their top 12 stories, 9 and 10 differed only on one item.
This is 7 Nightly News.
In Adelaide, 7 led with the human interest saga of the threatened dolphins.
Good evening. There's been a shock twist in the battle to save Marineland's condemned dolphins. A building union has threatened to stop the proposed $35 million redevelopment of the site if the dolphins are killed.
And it was, despite the American voice over the title, a strong local bulletin. Choice of international news was curious. Neither China nor Gorbachev in Bonn got a run, but Hungarian politics and Hitler's yacht did.
10 days after being scuttled off Miami, Hitler's old yacht Ostwind has to be brought up again.
And there was the obligatory banter with the sports reporter.
Time for sports news. Here is the little battler, everybody's favourite friend, Max Stevens.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Channel 9 Brisbane, with the Arthur and Martha format, boasts a news studio only slightly smaller than a suburban shopping centre. It's intended to suggest vast resources. For all that, Brisbane's 9 News was not strongly local. It relied heavily on stories which originated elsewhere, but credit where it's due. Their Sportsman's cricket script was the wittiest and the best written of any stations, and at least we saw some cricket.
England were being led like lambs to the slaughter.
Got him, he's gone, yes, he's out.
It was 3 for 77, and Ian Chappell must have been seeing red when Gower again tickled one down the leg.
You're really clutching at straws when you're trying to get blokes caught at leg slip.
Catch, beautifully taken.
Finally, Big Merv knocked the wag out of the England tail.
Sydney's 10 News led with crime and death and had fewer differences from Melbourne 10 than I had expected. Crime was their backbone, including a poor effort on Mr. Craig Trimboli's bail hearing, cobbled together out of library film.
It's more than 2 years since Craig Trimboli attended his father's funeral. Not buried was the reputation from which the name Trimboli is inseparable.
10 wastes 2 excellent journalists by using them as star newsreaders, padding out a thin bulletin with small talk.
Makes you feel old, doesn't it? All those songs.
Some of us.
Some of us. After the break, how to balance our payments in the car market.
An hour of news on 10 means length, not depth, and funny news values. This item, picked up by the other networks, wasn't used.
A small boy in traditional costume attracted to Gorbachev's attention. What followed was a publicist's dream. The boy ended up hoisted on the Soviet leader's shoulder, a young symbol of German-Soviet friendship.
Not 10, but most news producers thought that was a good story. 7 in Perth led, obviously, with the Leinster mine disaster. Then the station made itself news, with lengthy and somewhat confusing coverage of its own court action over a ban on reporting evidence in the Rothwell's case.
As Alison Fan reports, 7 Nightly News is prevented from revealing startling details given by a former Rothwell's lawyer last week.
They managed to make a story out of the reporting restrictions, which they ran for 1 minute and 10 seconds, so they got their money's worth. 7 in Perth is another of those Arthur and Martha newses, complete with jokey weatherman.
Friday is fine, Saturday is fine. I'm pretty fine. Hope you're fine. Back to Rick and Sue.
Thanks, Grant. And that's the news for Wednesday, June the 14th in Perth.
ABC News rates higher in Perth than any other mainland capital. It's more heavily local than 7 and shared the same lead stories.
All hope is lost for the remaining 5 miners trapped underground at the flooded Emu mine in the state's goldfields.
The ABC's report on China picked up, as did everyone but 9, the real story of the student leader. Remember David Broadbent's report on the feasting hunger striker?
Hidden camera also captured him eating at a restaurant when he was supposed to be on a hunger strike.
Well, there was more to it than that.
The government claims this was during their hunger strike, although the date on the videotape is 1 week after the hunger strike ended.
The Sino-Stalinists still have a lot to learn about media manipulation. Generally, the bulletins we looked at were obsessed with style, not substance. Hollywood stuff, in which the presenters were much more important than the stories. On Wednesday, newsroom skills, including film scripting and writing and designing explanatory graphics, were practically nowhere to be seen. News values were determined by pictorial content, and readers simply linked a string of packages, all of them prefabricated, and usually satellited in from distant information factories. Market research has established invariably that television is, by a huge margin, perceived to be the most credible news medium. On the basis of last Wednesday night, that's almost frightening. The top. Otherwise, we could be misled, couldn't we? It's good night from me, and good night from them.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. From all of us, good night.
Good night.
Good night.
And good night. For now, I'm Steve Liebman. Thanks for joining us.
And I'm Geraldine Dukes. Good night.